If you're looking for a career in a startup, I'd say the best way to judge them is through the interview process. If the interview process feels easy, that's kind of a bad sign. I'm someone who's quite self-driven. The big companies become frustrating after a while. So
now we're gonna switch a little bit more into tips and lessons learned in all those years of career, like more than 18 years of career. So let's start hard. Like what were the biggest mistakes in your careers and the biggest lessons learned from you?
On the leadership side, it would definitely be the kind of shit sandwich. It's the idea of delivering feedback, and kind of putting something nice on either side of it. I think isn't good for either party. Like if you're a leader, you should definitely kind of tear the plaster off, give the feedback people need to hear so that they can improve. And it'll also help you as a leader because you're more likely to get a strong response to that, and maybe you can take something away from it too.
Yeah, I have like mixed feelings with this kind of sandwich feedback. Because at the end of the day, it's like you're giving something nice, then you're giving something that is not that nice, and then something nice. Don't you think like your message, like kind of like don't go straight to the point? Like, why do you think it's useful?
Because it gets lost. So you give someone the feedback and they walk out of the room and they just remember the last bit, which was like, pretty nice, right? And you keep giving that feedback and then the person doesn't realize they maybe have something they really need to work on and improve. And if you want to scale your team up, you need to give that feedback straight so they can action it. And it's painful, for both sides, but it's actually a lot easier than letting things run too far and then having to give the direct feedback.
So you would say like learning how to give feedback was key for you?
Yeah, definitely.
At the beginning, you didn't necessarily understand how to,
Yeah, I tried to dress it up too much, yeah.
Cool. I've seen, and whenever I'm talking with people that are in their universities or out of the college, they are kind of obsessed by the idea like, I want to work for Google, I want to work for Amazon, I want to work for a big company just because they have the name.
Yeah.
They have, they are cool in a way. What are the main differences between a big company like Amazon, a medium company like a Snapchat, and a small company like Freetrade, a small kind of company?
Yeah, I think the bigger companies, and Snapchat was still 1,000 engineers, so you still have to be fairly organized at that size. To survive for that amount of time, against the competition, the engineering teams have to be fairly well organized, right? If they were bad engineering teams, they really wouldn't make it that far. So if you go into a big company, if you know a little bit about the business, you have some decent expectations or kind of fair expectations of what the engineering team might look like. With a startup, it's harder to know like what the quality of the team is going to be like. I say if you're looking for a career in a startup, I'd say the best way to judge them is through the interview process. If the interview process feels easy, that's kind of a bad sign. They might have hired some great people by chance, but also they're very likely to have hired not very good people because they haven't measured for the important things. So, yeah.
Do you think a startup is the right place just out of the university? Could you choose like now? Suppose that we are 18 years ago. Do you think it's the right fit when you are out of the university, or you are missing some parts that a big company can give you?
I would say an engineering team, so whatever the company size is, 10, 20 engineers with a good hiring process and a good leveling process within the team. I think you could get a lot of value out of that. And it depends on your character really at that stage as well. So if you're somebody who is really kind of self-driven, then I think you may find there's greater opportunity to be had at that startup. And if you're someone who's not really sure what you want to be doing, then a big company can kind of offer that direction.
So what do you like and dislike about big companies, and what do you like and dislike about a startup?
I think because I am someone who's quite self-driven, the big companies become frustrating after a while. So, first year or so, or first 6 months, you kind of find your feet kind of fitting into the company. And then 12 months runs around and, you're really starting to make an impact. But after you get like a year and a half, 2 years, it's hard for you to push outside of the realms of kind of structure you might be working in. Some companies do better than others at moving people around and kind of enabling that opportunity. But I think, if you're very like self-driven, that can become a frustration. On the startup side, it's kind of the inverse of that. So for me, there's a great opportunity to make an impact and to define how things should work. But sometimes, you kind of need a break, and that opportunity doesn't come around so easily.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? Because when you are in a big company, you are covered in a way, or you're secure in a way.
Yeah.
And in a startup, it's more risky because like, hey, listen, if we don't do this right, or our customers are not happy, and we don't grow the business, maybe the VC people or the investors will come and say, hey, we don't believe in you anymore. So is it something like, as a top leader, how do you protect yourself to not be to be clear and say, this is the vision, this is where we go, and if other stakeholders come and say, hey, what about this and that, you protect the people around you?
So making sure we're kind of going in the right direction, we use like a process for that actually, which is OKRs, and there's some really clear things we need to do from, say, the customer perspective, and then there's some more strategic things which maybe run slightly longer, and we try and put those together and use like OKRs, objectives and key results, a way of formalizing like the direction the company should be heading in, right? So at the top it's very much like, this is the kind of way the ship's heading, and then we kind of work out from there what things we can do to make that happen.
So now let's talk more about junior engineers. So from all of the years of careers, what are the biggest mistakes that junior engineers or people out of the college make when they start in a new team? Because for me, most of the time it's all about earning trust of the people, making sure that you have the right mindset. But what are the biggest mistakes that you have seen?
I think one thing that can be a little bit frustrating is, when you're a junior engineer, and I'm sure I didn't do a good job of this, but you have to remember that, although you might know this like part of the industry quite well, there's probably a certain number of bits you don't know well, and those things layer on top of each other as well. So it's kind of more system design, architecture stuff. It's very hard to pick that up with a limited amount of time. So you just have to be prepared to, put in the extra work to find out what those things look like. So if you're working with the team and you find yourself coming up with a roadblock, ask for help, definitely reach out for help, but also understand where it's an area where you're asking for more help on average. Take the time to go and kind of bolster your knowledge in the area. Go and read a book on it. Ask people actually in the team, like, how can I improve myself in this area? And people will be very happy to help you with that.
So you mentioned before that from time to time, do you like take weekends off to create a project or work with a new technology? But something that I found challenging is, how do you integrate the learning process, like reading books, doing courses, and all this stuff in your day-to-day life while you need to ship, you need to move fast?
Yeah. It's really, really hard. So the best way you form habits really is you kind of force them a little bit. So I have an app I think it's called Habits, and it literally prompts me to do things on a regular basis. So I take the time in the morning just to read for 20 minutes. I'm lucky enough that I go on a train, so it makes quite a good gap for that. But it's very easy to think, we've got to ship this thing today, so maybe I should leave that. So I really, really kind of try and force myself. And then, at the end of that process, I'm generally quite grateful because something will pop up at work and I'll think, I've actually read about that as an article I can share that just happens to coincide with some work that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's just step back a little bit and let's talk more of you as a manager and as a person that needs to grow teams. Right now, I think you have around like 6 new opportunities open for hiring new people, from apps developers to backend. So what have you found the most critical part, or the most important part, or the most like the bottlenecks when you need to grow teams?
Finding people is generally.
So finding people, you mean like how do you discover them, or how do you try to persuade them to come to your office and talk and sell the idea? Yeah,
I think there just aren't many senior engineers of the level that we expect of Freetrade not working in London. So they're all what generally referred to as passive candidates. So that means they're already working somewhere else. So getting people working somewhere else to come and work for you is obviously quite a time expensive project, and you may get so far and then they decide they're going to stay with their current role or they're going to move to somewhere else. So that's just a great challenge in terms of time and effort. And what have you learned with that challenge? How do you convince those people to come to work with you? Yeah, building a profile of the company has been really important. So we've got a blog, which I'm sure you've seen, that's got some pretty great content on that now from the engineering team and from the rest of the team. And we had a candidate the other day, and she probably wouldn't have continued with the she got a thing in her inbox saying, we used to talk to us at Freetrade, and it's because she went and looked at the blog, she thought, oh, this is an interesting company, they're working on some great stuff, that she took that step forward. So definitely I'd say for small startups, promoting yourself properly is an important factor.
Let's suppose that you say from now to in 1 year from now, you need to grow 100 new people, which it's crazy, and it's a huge growth. How do you scale your teams? How do you, now that you're growing in Freetrade, how can you keep having the culture, a healthy culture, and how can you make sure that those new people get together good with the people that is currently working now here?
So specifically on the culture side?
Yeah.
I think I was just reading an article the other day, like hiring for culture is actually a really important thing. So obviously we have a technical process, but we also have a completely separate kind of cultural interview process. And as we get bigger, we need to formalize not just what kind of questions are seen there, but how we reflect on those questions as a team. So, we have debriefs after an interview process, and we refer to what we see as our company values or what we see as our kind of leveling guidelines, and use that to assess whether or not somebody's a good fit for the team.
So basically creating the framework and make sure that on new hirings, is the kind of way you think about the company or the culture and the team. It's really nice. So now let's suppose that I'm just out of the college.
Yeah.
How can I get an opportunity for work for Freetrade? What are the keys or the values that are you looking for, for a junior person?
So if you've been to a good university and you've worked hard, you're probably good at coding. Most of your co-students will be good at. If you've been to a strong university, I think you probably done a good job at getting the basics down. For me, the thing that would make you stand out, the thing that would make you stand out in the CV, is if you've been working on some of your own projects. Because I think taking that, expertise, but just in writing some software maybe to solve coding problems at university, but turning it into building a product is quite a different challenge. And I think if you're truly motivated about technology, it's not just a way of getting a career so you can pay the bills, you're probably going to be doing that anyway. So most strong candidates are doing something in their spare time. And that doesn't mean committing to some big open source project. It could just mean building a website, for a family member, or building an app that you wanted on your phone. But I think those are great indicators.
So you mentioned the CV or the resume. What are the biggest mistakes that you have seen from people making?
That surprises me every time, but that happens quite a lot, is someone just lists a really perfunctory kind of CV. It just says, I made this thing, I worked well with teammates. It doesn't tell you anything more than where you worked really, and the project names that you worked on. So a good CV for me, you describe the kind of problems that you're solving, why they were valuable problems for the business, what you learned from those problems.
What you're saying is don't list buzzwords, so don't list cool things just because that are important in a resume. Just make sure that you list your impact and why should I hire you, or what
And also just what was you could say I built a FinTech app, right? But why was that hard, right? So I built a FinTech app and I had to solve a difficult double bookkeeping problem that had the following challenges. It had concurrency challenges. You're talking about the problem because you're probably passionate about the work that you've done as well.
So now in Freetrade, you have a very solid senior engineers in place. So you are also hiring new juniors people. But my question, for a startup like this, how can you make sure that you bring people, junior people, because it's important and it's a different diverse talent, but how can you make sure that they can start shipping fast?
Yeah.
And how can you make sure that their onboarding process is really nice and efficient?
Yeah, I actually think it's interesting, but you could have been coding for 10 years, but if you walk into a new company, it's a new code base, it's new processes, they have a different way of signing in some services. Onboarding is critically important for senior people, the same as it is for junior people. So we got on that pretty early on, built started off as a simple document that onboarded you into the team, and we've kind of progressed that over time. So we started to build out runbooks. Now if you're on call, they give you an idea of what you need to look for and how you need to debug the situation. And having those tools in place mean that not only is it good for senior engineers, but when juniors join, they can cut up to speed really quickly. And I think because we have a good foundation of senior engineers, we can feed junior engineers smaller, like more contained tasks as part of a bigger project that senior engineers are working on, and they start to build that experience, and then they can like move on to the rest of the code base.
Cool. So now like the last questions of the interviews. So the banking sector is, you're working with real money, and that's very challenging. So how could you describe the difference between working in another non-banking company and writing software in a bank? Like, what are the main difference, or the way people should think differently?
Yeah, I mean, if you're most kind of diligent engineers who really care about their craft, it's kind of the ideal role in many ways, because you may be forced in some companies to kind of ship without tests, but that's actually, the compliance risk analysis you do as a financial company that you're obligated to do. But if you were lucky enough to have Dan, who leads the kind of compliance team, really ensure that like there's a process that exists where the engineers are kind of brought to task, or have to explain and justify the quality of the software they have. So if we have an outage, we need to take a record of the outage, like how long did it last for, and then we need to have like a post-mortem process in place, and from that we can say, well, we need more automated tests here, or we need to take more time on this thing. So it's kind of an ideal situation for building good software.
Mm-hmm. So now, like, what are the technologies that you're most excited about?
Yeah.
Or what are the kind of fields inside of the engineering that you're really, really passionate?
Yeah, like I'm a big fan of serverless. We had a blog post recently that talked about that. I think that's the way that most people would be shipping software, the same way that most people don't have their own on-premise hardware anymore. I think there's some challenges in that, but it's constantly improving. So it's kind of nice to kind of work through that and see what the cloud providers bring out. Also quite interested in a design pattern that we're using here to help us kind of shore up the accounting process, and that's something called event sourcing, and that gives you some real safety in the way that the software is built and gives you a good understanding of where everybody's money is at all times.
How do you see, like, if you need to like envision the future, 5 years from now, how good you want to see Freetrade?
I really, if anyone is thinking about investing, like, we're the app that they think of. The same way, from a banking point of view, you think of Monzo, if you think of a new fintech. I want us to be like that for investing. Like, we're building the team to do that right now. I think we can definitely, if we execute well over the next couple of years, we can definitely get there.
And how do you see the future of banking?
How do I see the future of banking? A lot more frictionless. I think a lot of barriers. When banking was first made digital rather than digitized, there was a lot of like knee-jerk panic. I don't know if you recall, but first you could access it online, then everyone started to send you dongles, and it actually became more painful to bank. I think we're going to solve those problems in different ways now, kind of security problems in different ways. It's going to be much easier to share money as well, and share your resources and understand your money. So you might have an investment account with us, but you may have a cash savings account with somebody else, and you put those two things together and be able to see a summary of it.
Cool. Now I want you to take like this video and those people that are watching, and I would like you to give a message, like an advice or something that you want people, like especially people that are out of the university, remember, and something that you feel like it's really important to say.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would be just like whatever you find that you're passionate about, just go deep on that, keep working hard at that, and you'll find that your career happens anyway.
So passion.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you very much. That's the end. Video, it's over. That's all. But you can still watch more videos. Maybe you can enjoy this video. Or maybe you can enjoy this video. Or maybe this one. Or you know what? Maybe you can watch all of them. And by the way, if you really enjoy the channel, subscribe right here. Just one click and